The flames roared higher as Father Urbain Grandier screamed his innocence from the stake, but his cries were drowned out by the demonic shrieks coming from the nearby convent. 17 nuns writhed in supernatural agony, speaking in tongues, contorting their bodies impossibly, and naming the burning priest as the sorcerer who had possessed them with devils. This was August 18th, 1634, and the small French town of Loudun was witnessing the most notorious case of mass demonic possession in European history. But was Father Grandier really a satanic sorcerer who had corrupted an entire convent, or was he the victim of a conspiracy so twisted that it destroyed hundreds of innocent lives? This is the shocking true story of how one man's alleged pact with the devil turned a peaceful village into hell on earth. Father Urbain Grandier arrived in the town of Loudun in 1617 as a young, handsome, and brilliantly educated priest who seemed destined for greatness in the Catholic Church. The 27-year-old cleric possessed everything the Church valued: classical education, theological knowledge, extraordinary preaching ability, and the kind of magnetic personality that could fill churches and convert sinners. But Grandier also possessed qualities that would prove fatal in the religiously charged atmosphere of 17th century France: pride, ambition, and an appetite for earthly pleasures that would make him powerful enemies. Loudun was a prosperous market town in western France, strategically located along major trade routes and dominated by its ancient castle and numerous religious institutions. The town housed several convents, monasteries, and churches, creating a concentrated religious community where reputation and moral standing were matters of life and death. Into this environment came Grandier, whose charismatic sermons and scholarly reputation quickly made him the most prominent cleric in the region. But Grandier's success bred resentment among his fellow priests and the local nobility. His sermons were too popular, his education too obvious, and his lifestyle too comfortable for a man who had taken vows of poverty and humility. Worse still, rumors began circulating about the handsome priest's relationships with women. In a town where clerical celibacy was supposed to be absolute, whispers of Grandier's affairs with prominent married women created a scandal that his enemies were eager to exploit. The first serious accusations against Grandier came in 1629, when he was charged with sexual misconduct and immoral behavior. His enemies claimed he had seduced multiple women, fathered illegitimate children, and turned his church into a den of sexual impropriety. While Grandier managed to clear his name through legal maneuvering and powerful friends, the accusations damaged his reputation and created a network of enemies determined to destroy him. The situation became explosive when Grandier became involved in local politics, opposing the destruction of Loudun's fortifications ordered by Cardinal Richelieu. This political stance made him an enemy of the most powerful man in France after the king, virtually guaranteeing that his downfall would be swift and merciless. Richelieu's agents began looking for any excuse to eliminate the troublesome priest, and they found it in the most unexpected place: the nearby Ursuline convent. The Ursuline convent of Loudun housed 17 nuns under the leadership of Mother Superior Jeanne d'Angers, a hunchbacked woman whose physical deformities had created deep psychological wounds. The convent was supposed to be a place of prayer and contemplation, but it had become a hotbed of sexual frustration, religious hysteria, and barely suppressed violence. The nuns were mostly young women from noble families, forced into religious life against their will and subjected to harsh discipline that bred resentment and rebellion. In September 1632, the convent erupted in what appeared to be supernatural chaos. Sister Jeanne d'Anger began experiencing violent convulsions, speaking in unknown languages and claiming that devils had possessed her body. Within days, the possession spread to other nuns, creating scenes of mass hysteria that terrified and fascinated observers. The possessed nuns writhed on the ground, contorted their bodies into impossible positions, and spoke with voices that seemed to come from hell itself. When questioned about the source of their possession, the nuns unanimously named Father Urbain Grandier as the sorcerer responsible for their condition. They claimed that Grandier had entered the convent in spiritual form, seduced them with demonic magic, and filled their bodies with devils through satanic rituals. Most damning of all, they produced what they claimed was a pact signed by Grandier and Satan himself, written in Latin and supposedly sealed with the priest's blood. The accusations created a sensation throughout France and beyond. Exorcists were summoned from across Europe to combat the demonic infestation, drawing crowds of thousands to witness the supernatural battles between good and evil. The possessed nuns became celebrities, their convulsions and utterances recorded in detail by fascinated observers, who saw them as living proof of Satan's war against the Church. Public exorcisms became theatrical spectacles that combined religious ritual with entertainment. The nuns would be brought out before crowds of spectators, where they would writhe in apparent agony, while priests attempted to drive out their demons. The devils possessing them would speak through their mouths, engaging in theological debates with the exorcists and providing intimate details about their supposed relationship with Father Grandier. The investigation into Grandier's alleged sorcery was conducted with ruthless efficiency by Cardinal Richelieu's agents, who saw an opportunity to eliminate a political enemy while appearing to defend the faith. They assembled evidence through torture, intimidation, and fraud, creating a case that seemed overwhelming despite its fundamental weakness. Witnesses were coerced into testifying against Grandier. Documents were forged, and expert opinion was manufactured to support the prosecution's narrative. The most crucial piece of evidence was the supposed pact between Grandier and Satan, a document so obviously fraudulent that it would be laughable if its consequences hadn't been so tragic. The pact was written in Latin with numerous grammatical errors, signed with names that included obvious mistakes, and contained theological concepts that no educated priest would endorse. Modern handwriting analysis has proven the document was a crude forgery, but 17th century investigators either ignored its flaws or were complicit in the deception. Throughout the investigation, Grandier maintained his innocence with a dignity that impressed even his enemies. He denied all charges of sorcery, pointed out the logical flaws in the accusations against him, and challenged his prosecutors to provide genuine evidence rather than hysteria and hearsay. His scholarly defense of himself was so effective that some observers began questioning whether the accusations were politically motivated rather than spiritually inspired. The trial itself was a predetermined spectacle designed to provide legal cover for a political assassination. Grandier was denied adequate legal representation, prevented from cross-examining witnesses, and subjected to torture designed to extract a confession. When he refused to admit guilt, even under extreme physical duress, his torturers interpreted his endurance as proof of supernatural assistance from Satan. The torture sessions were conducted with medieval brutality, including crushing of the legs with devices designed to shatter bone, pulling of limbs with ropes and pulleys, and application of burning materials to sensitive areas of the body. Contemporary accounts describe Grandier's suffering in horrific detail, noting that he endured pain that would have broken most men while continuing to protest his innocence and forgive his torturers. On August 18, 1634, Father Aubain was burned alive in the public square of Loudun before a crowd of thousands. As the flames consumed his body, the possessed nuns in their nearby convent reportedly went into renewed convulsions, their demons supposedly celebrating the destruction of their master. Grandier's final words were prayers for his enemies and protestations of innocence that impressed even hostile observers. The execution was supposed to end the demonic possession that had terrorized Loudun for 2 years, but the nuns' convulsions continued for years afterward. This inconvenient fact undermined the entire narrative that had justified Grandier's death, but by then it was too late to question the verdict. The possessed nuns became a tourist attraction, drawing visitors from across Europe who came to witness the ongoing supernatural drama. Modern analysis of the Loudun possessions reveals a complex web of sexual hysteria, political manipulation, and mass psychology that had nothing to do with supernatural forces. The nuns were likely suffering from conversion disorder, a psychological condition that can create dramatic physical symptoms in response to extreme stress. Their accusations against Grandier were probably the result of sexual fantasy, suggestion from their interrogators, and the unconscious desire to destroy a man who represented everything they had been forced to renounce. The political dimension of the case is equally clear. Cardinal Richelieu needed to eliminate Grandier for opposing royal policy, and the possession accusations provided perfect cover for what was essentially a state-sponsored murder. By framing the execution as a religious necessity rather than a political act, Richelieu avoided the criticism that would have followed a more obvious assassination. The psychological manipulation of the nuns was systematic and cruel. Their interrogators used leading questions, physical abuse, and religious pressure to extract the testimony they needed, while providing the sisters with detailed scripts for their demonic performances. The young women, isolated from outside contact and subjected to constant pressure, eventually internalized their roles so completely that they may have genuinely believed they were possessed. The case had devastating effects on the entire community of Loudun. Families were torn apart by accusations of witchcraft. Innocent people were tortured and executed, and the town's reputation was destroyed. The economic impact was severe, as trade dried up and visitors came only to gawk at the supernatural spectacle rather than conduct normal business. The social fabric of the community was permanently damaged by the paranoia and suspicion that the case generated. The legacy of Father Grandier's persecution extended far beyond Loudun. His case became a symbol of religious fanaticism and political corruption, inspiring works of literature, philosophy, and art that questioned the relationship between faith and reason. Writers like Voltaire used Grandier's story to attack religious superstition, while later scholars recognized it as an early example of how mass hysteria could be manipulated for political purposes. Archaeological investigation of the execution site has uncovered evidence supporting the historical accounts of Grandier's death. Burnt bone fragments and other physical remains confirm that a public burning took place at the location described in contemporary documents, providing material evidence for what might otherwise seem like an incredible story. The Loudon possessions also influenced the development of psychology and psychiatry, as later scholars recognized the nuns' symptoms as manifestations of mental illness rather than supernatural interference. The case became a foundational study in the psychology of suggestion, mass hysteria, and the ways that authority figures can manipulate vulnerable individuals. Father Urbain Grandier died as he lived with dignity, intelligence, and faith in ultimate justice. His persecution represents one of history's most clear-cut examples of how religious authority can be corrupted by political power and personal ambition. The priest who was accused of selling his soul to Satan was actually destroyed by men who had sold their souls to earthly power and personal revenge. The flames that consumed Grandier's body in Loudon's public square were fueled not by divine justice, but by human corruption. His story serves as a permanent warning about the dangers of religious extremism, political manipulation, and the terrible price that innocent people pay when superstition overwhelms reason and justice becomes the servant of power rather than truth.